I've been fortunate to have had an incredible year filled with photography adventures. I travelled through Morocco and I went to Amsterdam, as well as visited many cities and events all over the UK. But there was one thing that I've learned the value of most in 2023, and that's how focal length choice can completely change the way you see the world and the kind of images you want to make. But more on that later. In this video, I'm going to show you some of my favourite images from 2023, as well as some important lessons I've learned, including how and why my street photography has developed and changed over the course of the year. So let's start with some images from the beginning of the year. Very much sticking to and including a lot of abstraction and layering, focusing more on the form of the image rather than the content of the photo. And this is a style that I've quite enjoyed developing over time, but it's something I'll discuss a little bit later on in the video. And while I enjoyed the beginning of the year and had a lot of success with some images that I really liked, I had this increasing feeling that I was making photos purely for their aesthetic value rather than including anything remotely meaningful, focusing more on making pretty pictures over pushing myself to try new things. I didn't really address this right away, but it was in the back of my mind a lot as I went out on more photo walks that I was starting to sort of repeat myself and fall back on similar ideas over and over. But having said that, focusing on framing and aesthetics by using the environment can be a fantastic way to turn a boring place into something far more interesting, full of photographic opportunities. And this is where I learned a really great lesson, which is that you can make great photos pretty much anywhere. It just depends on how creative you can be and how hard you want to work for it. I have wanted to visit Morocco since I was a kid, ever since my dad told me his stories from years of living there in the early 80s, so I was grateful to get the chance to explore the country for a few weeks in April. I was mindful that people culturally in Morocco don't really like having their photograph taken, which was fine for me at the time because it meant I could focus more on my aesthetic style, showcasing the environment as much as the people who live there. Up on screen now are some of the highlights from the trip. I learned a big lesson here, which is when travelling, it's important to respect local customs and cultures. And as such, you need to shoot to the conditions. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're in a quiet and boring location, then focus on the environment and abstraction. If you're in a country where people don't want their photo taken, then focus on how creative you can get with your framing and bring the environment more into play. Or maybe still take photos of people, but just try to find a way to frame up your shot so it doesn't actually show their facial features. And then if you're in a place with a lot happening, then maybe try and get up closer and see if you can create frames full of action, but a bit more on that later on. So yeah, you can only really photograph what's in front of you, so make the best of what you have. When I got back from Morocco, I was really happy with the photos. I made a little digital zine and I was quite pleased with the project, but I still had this sort of nagging feeling that my photography was stagnating a bit, and I wasn't really sure how to address that. So I still went out on more photography trips, photographing the same way, but thinking a lot about how I could potentially change it up a bit. And that's when I realised I just needed to change something, do something new, take the risk and see what happens. So I bought a new lens. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, that's not a risk, it's just buying a new lens. But for me, it was a risk because I get used to shooting in a certain way and looking for scenes in a certain way and framing my shots because I'm very familiar with the focal length that I'm using. So it was a bit of a risk because I knew that by changing my focal length, I would ultimately end up changing how I shoot. And that was a little bit daunting. You know, change in general can just be a little bit scary, but I was really excited at the same time. I picked up the 23mm f2 Fuji lens, so 35mm full frame equivalent, and I never really looked back. It was really quite hard at first, and obviously it required me to change how I see and what to look for, but I was definitely ready for the challenge. So that's the next very valuable lesson. If things aren't working for you, change something with intention. That could be a lens, camera, location, style, workshops, what photography you look at, but just don't buy new gear for the hell of it. As I've touched on already, focal length can completely change the style of your photos. So if you aren't sure of the work you're making and maybe you want to try something new, then just try a different focal length, stick with it for a while and see what happens. Like I said, it was really hard at first. I was hesitant to get close and made a lot of crap photos. But over time and practice, I was starting to see a few results that really excited me to go out and shoot. I just started to love the challenge of getting closer and focusing more on the content of photos, the moment and subjects much more than the form or aesthetics of a scene. Of course, I still wanted to make great images with strong composition and to be pleasing to look at, but I knew that would come with time and practice. I'd love to know the biggest photography lesson you've learnt this year, by the way, so drop it in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this video and finding it useful, hit the like button, it really helps spread the video for more people to see. Later on in the year, I made a couple of trips to London, and that's when this new approach really clicked for me. I started getting closer, being more confident, and tried to feel the frame more and also look for more meaningful moments of emotion, or at least meaningful to me. If you look at these photos compared to the work I was making at the start of the year, it's so different. I also know a lot of people won't like it and may prefer my old work, and that's absolutely fine. For me, it's vital to make photos I want to make, and that's another massive lesson. You have to photograph what's meaningful to you, not what other people might like. The moment that you try and take photographs to please other people or make photographs that you think will do well on social media is when you just lose what's so magical about photography in the first place. I took this new approach with me to Amsterdam as well and really started to seek out moments of humanity. I started looking for humorous things, but also things happening that are important to us all, which I think should be documented with a camera in some way. Here's another massive lesson that was so important to my photography development over the year, and that was getting closer. Getting closer into subjects and scenes with a wider lens, but also getting closer to a style, closer to a scene and purpose with my photography, which I can't wait to explore more in the next year. So if you feel your pictures aren't getting better, that's okay, but maybe you might want to really think about what you want to get out of your photography in the long run, and then pursue it. And finally, my new approach to street photography really clicked on my last few photo trips of the year, for a day at the races and the SantaCon event in London. Both trips were such a great day and fun places to practice the approach of getting closer. And this is my last lesson of the video, and something that I've done a lot this year and plan to do more next year, and that's to photograph events. Events make such great places to practice street photography because no one really cares that you're there documenting it, so you can be a bit bolder in your approach. Having said that, it can be easy to photograph an event literally, as it's an interesting thing happening. And you then might end up with event photos which, in my opinion, are all pretty boring. I try to approach it more by looking for fun and different moments in and amongst the event, but also on the fringes, trying to find little stories that work well out of context, and include moments of trying to find something a bit special happening in and amongst the festivities, aiming to show the intricacies of humanity in some way. Not just photographing the event because it's an event. Some of the photos from the races and SantaCon are definitely the direction where I want to take my photography going forward, which for me is super exciting. I thought I'd do this sort of format for my photography over the past year rather than going through and talking over each individual photo one by one, which might be a little bit boring. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you'd like to see how I made some of the images in this video, then check out this playlist. Or if you'd like some tips to take your photography to another level for next year, check out this video next. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.